right. What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. Hope you guys are well. Yeah, man. Been a little bit of a beginning, this week, a little difficult. It is what it is, getting back into the teaching season, as it were. What's up, Miss Queen Kalila? How you doing? What's up, Malika? Brother Dardar, what's going on? Good to see y'all. Got a number of people up in here. Mark, what's going on? Donnie, what's up? Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel if you will, so we can continue to bring you independent Black male thought and push the boundaries of some of this mess that we've been indoctrinated with, which is going to be one of the subjects that we delve into tonight. But yeah, man. What's up, Damon? See you in there. How you doing, Cassandra? It's been a trying last week, so I'm just getting back into the zone teaching. Trying to get my chops back. I'm I relaxed a little too hard at a certain point in the summer, so I'm getting back into it. So it's all good. The thing that really kind of took me out of it though, this last day. I was going to go on last night with this show, but ended up going to my son's open house, and he's starting his senior year, you know what I mean? So I've been going to open houses since kindergarten, and it just hit me last night. This is the last open house that I'm going to, so I met all his teachers and, all of that, but it was like weird. I'm like, wow, it's time, this is the last open house that I'm going to, you know what I mean? So y'all got to forgive me. I'm just I'm a little in my feelings as far as my son is concerned, because he's just, man, God willing, this time next year, he's starting school, you know what I mean? Shoot, man, I've been taking care of somebody for 20 something, 24, 25 years. So this whole empty nest thing is creeping up on me. It's creeping up. What's up, Tajay? Good to see you, brother. Brother Malika, what's up? So, yeah, shout out to Damon, member for 22 months. Much appreciated. So we're going to get into it. Hit the like button if you will. And you see the subject. I'm listening. What's going on? So we're dealing with today this question of the Gynocracy. Hold on. I'm trying to make sure we don't have any more glitches like we did last time. I thought I tested everything, but sometimes you just can't tell. Anyway, so, y'all see the subject. How was a Black Gynocracy created to undermine Black men? I've heard lately, some of the concepts that we've come up with here in this space being challenged, which whatever, we knew that was going to happen, so I don't have a problem with that. But it's been questionable, and some of the attacks we've gotten recently have been made personal, which I think is really just soft. I mean, it really doesn't have anything to do with the argument, but a lot of ad hominem kind of attacks going on, things of that nature, most particularly from male feminists, who I think are more like attack dogs in many ways. So it is what it is. Condemned you. May have mispronounced that, but I appreciate that support. Thank you. So they're coming at it and trying to dismantle what brothers are talking about. And the sad part about it is they're not even really attacking the arguments. It's a lot of, you know what it is? I was telling BGS this the other day. It's very high school mean girl. That's their debate style. High school mean girl. Talk snide about you, ad hominem attacks, dismissive gestures toward the research or the arguments you put forth, but nothing direct. Even if your name comes up, it's sad. So I was going to do a more of a full response to this cat FD signifier, but it's not really worth the time. He said he was going to do a video on me, so I'll wait to see if he does. If not, I really have little to say. I know he did a couple videos where he brought me up, and one in particular he did with Jared Ball, and they both kind of attacked me in a weird kind of passive aggressive way. He brought up the name of a video, and I could tell he didn't watch it. So, which if you're going to critique someone, at the very least, have something to say about what they said. He dismissed the video on the basis of the topic. Jared agreed with him because it associated feminism with slavery, and that wasn't a haphazard connection. Because in the same interview, they suggested that I hadn't been reading Curry, which I thought was hilarious. I've had Curry at my house. We've broken bread. He's been on this show many times. I've been using the man knot. This is the funny part. I've been using the man knot in my classes since before it was published. Tommy sent me the man knot when it was a Word document. So I've been teaching it before it was actually published, right? And so it was interesting. But that particular video that they dismissed on the basis of the title associated feminism and slavery because it was actually a quote from Tommy's Facebook page. And he was talking about the way Bell Hooks had been citing Samuel Cartwright, the developer of the concept of Dropodomania. So the association was sound. And amidst the accusations of not reading Curry, it was actually reading Curry where the title came from. So these kind of dismissive, mean girl tactics, sassiness, dismissive, deflective insults, it's childish. And I'm not, I really ain't going to give it much more than that. So like I said, I'll respond more fully if he decides to do the video he claimed he was going to do. If not, it is what it is. But at the end of the day, I'm more concerned about really expanding the vocabulary and the concepts that Black men can refer to better explain their situations. And I don't particularly care if people like it or don't like it. I don't care if it looks good in terms of conventional ideas of what's considered politically correct or not. I don't care if it aligns itself with what's popular in the academy, because the academy is part of the problem. So that said, let's get to it. So here I'm going to share. Now, I've shared this article several times before. That is not it. I've shared this article several times before, and I'm going to continue to as long as it's relevant to what I'm talking about. So this was a piece I did in 2018 on why Black Generation X was fatherless, right? And BGS kindly read it here on YouTube, and this is one of the pieces he did that kind of convinced me to go ahead and get started creating videos, right? So anyway, one things that I started with was an explanation of the institutional kinds of issues that many Black men faced. In essence, my father's generation, right? So this article really was an attempt to talk to other Gen X Black men and to say we need to reassess our fathers, because at the end of the day, we're still dealing with the same institutions that they dealt with, the same practices, the same policies. And when you look at the marriage rates, we step back further than our father's generations did. But we didn't, and many of us, when we reached adulthood, especially our 40s, we didn't step back and reassess what exactly many of our fathers dealt with. See, they got hit with the brunt of these policies before it had a name, before they knew what was going on. When I talk to men of that generation, much of the time they had no clear idea what was being used against them. And it tends to be that way. Like right now, we don't have a clear sense of what's going on. It takes 20, 30 years before we can look back with some degree of clarity, right? And so what I did with this piece is I talked about the various ways that Black men found themselves under assault in the 1960s, the 1970s, most particularly, and beyond, right? And I didn't order these based on an order of importance, but I just laid them out just for consideration. So we could have a starting point rooted in policy to understand the Black male plight, at least in the 1970s, right? So, I talked about, drafting policies that are primarily male, right? Men get drafted in the war, but when you talk about Black men, looking at the impact of the Korean Wars, the Vietnam War, so on and so forth, the impact of that on Black men and their participation in families, everything from the impact of drugs and PTSD, the impact that had. And the policy aspect of it is that we were drafted in many instances, right? I was just playing John Henrik Clarke's film, A Great and Mighty Walk, to my students today. And he talked about being drafted into war, right? So the impact of that. So World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and then onward. We can talk about, contemporary wars where Black men who joined the military, because there were limited opportunities in the Black community, found themselves on the receiving end of high-level trauma in the midst of serving, right? So the impact of that and its relationship to policy, the effect on Black men. we talk about welfare, we talk about the man in the house rule, the policy based notion that families couldn't get support unless the men were absent. The impact this had on Black families after the Great Migration, coming out of the South, coming out of sharecropping, coming into the so-called North, the Midwest, trying to find jobs, trying to find some type of economic security, and finding, if anything, that in many instances, the only way their families could eat is if they weren't present. And the impact of that over time. So that is a policy, true. But afterwards, the ongoing multi-generational impact of seeing Black men absent from families and the way that the state plays a role in that, the way the state plays a role in making individual Black men compete with the United States government as far as supporting families. Now, you're coming out of the South, you're coming out of sharecropping, and you're trying to get jobs in the North. And it's ridiculously difficult, right? Even if you're able to get a job right around World War II, when those white soldiers came back, they gave those jobs back to them. The advent of what we call the ghetto today in the North, as it were, is a product of those Black folk being pushed out of employment and not wanting to go back down South, right, to sharecropping. So that's the advent of the ghetto, right? 40s, 50s, and onward. So policy-based still has an impact on the Black family and on Black men in particular in terms of their capacity to provide, right? Family court policy, especially in the 1970s, the advent of no-fault divorce, judgments for child support, and so on and so forth, exaggerated in many instances. I've raised a child. Certain things don't have to be crazy expensive, but nevertheless, my point here being that the impact of this on Black families was such that Black men couldn't compete in many respects. You got a family court that is overwhelmingly female leaning. It doesn't leave men, particularly Black men, who come out of a historical lack of inherited wealth. Very little for them to operate with, right? So it further pushes them from families. I talk about birth control, mainly because through pharmaceutical technology, you really gave, control of one's body on sexual terms, in terms of reproduction, to one gender. I've said this before. Compared to women, we're still over here rubbing sticks to create fire. I mean, we got a piece of rubber, we got the pull-out method, and we got, abstinence. Meanwhile, they got, over 5 major forms and 5 major types of birth control in a varied variety of forms. And that doesn't even include abortion. So we're talking about the absence of access for abortion for women across the country. But there are so many other forms of birth control that they can use before, during, and after the sex act. And men still have a piece of rubber cost a couple dollars at the liquor store. That's the furthest we've got for reproductive technology for men. So what that did is it gave women complete control of their bodies. It gave men the same amount of control they had beforehand. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't mean you can't do what you have to do to protect yourself as a man, but it is to say the lack of investment in reproductive technology as far as men are concerned, especially in a poor community like Black folk in the 60s and 70s, gave an overwhelming tilt to who has access to self-control in a variety of ways and who doesn't. So the 15-year-old kid that has his first experience and just wants to try it out and ends up being a father, and him being a father is solely determined by whatever decision she makes, and him being subject to that, it's a problem. We can't even have a conversation about a financial abortion where men can choose whether or not they want to be involved. You have no choice. The state forces men to be involved so that men can pay for it, and states can be reimbursed from the federal government. So there's a policy and an incentive to leave men responsible for families, for reproduction, and leave women with whatever they choose to have. They get options, they get choice, they have technology. Men have very little. All of that is a problem. You talk about, I listed Title IX, sex discrimination policy. And even though technically men are included because of the gender neutrality of much of the language, in terms of practice, men still aren't really taken seriously. We can see it in social media. We can see it in terms of arrest rates. I mean, when you talk about, there's recently been a rash of cases where women are running over men with cars, and people still try to dismiss it as self-defense, even when there's no self-defense issue on the table. It's a way of rationalizing women's behavior, but men still get held accountable even when they're victimized. So the kind of one-sidedness of Title IX policy in terms of its practice is part of the problem there as well. And I should say it's the same for the man in the house rule in regard to welfare, because technically that rule is no longer in effect, but the practice has continued since then, even though it's not technically on the books. So those are the kind of things we're looking at. Talked about financial aid, access to college. I'll go into a little bit more of that later, because there's an impact on education in regard to Black men and white collar employment. We can talk about affirmative action, double minority status, right? It was recently a general, as a matter of fact, who came out and made a statement about that a couple weeks ago, talking about how he was the only Black male in the room, but he overheard or thought about, I think he said he overheard, some of his white counterparts talking about how much more useful it would have been had they hired a Black woman, because she checks two boxes. But there was an actual practice in the 70s and 80s of double minority status that left many Black men in a position where they couldn't compete, most particularly with white women who got the lion's share of affirmative action resources. Right? We didn't check as many boxes as other groups. That had an impact. And then, of course, female-centered media, the degree to which over the last few decades, we've primarily seen Black men through the lens of Black media as monsters, abusers. And this has been taken as fact in some circles, right? But today, what I wanted to talk about what I consider to be the latest addition to this list, right? This list I've had up for some years now. It's not new. Um, so bear in mind, if you're running across it now, it's been up for a while. So there's 8 points there, but I wanted to add the ninth point. And the ninth point had a little bit to do with watching some of these male feminists and their talking points in response to men. Now, here's the thing. I do need to clarify this. If you are at all concerned with improving the quality of life for Black men, I don't know how you completely sidestep or demonize the first movement I've seen in my lifetime where Black men are actually starting to articulate for themselves what their issues are, rather than allowing other people to tell them what they are. And if you have problems with what Black men are saying or how they're saying it, join the conversation, and do so by challenging with data, with argument, with accuracy, so we can push the conversation along. That's what I'm trying to do. Because I support the manosphere doesn't mean I agree with everything that's been said or everyone that said something. I agree that Black men should have the right to have the discussions, whether or not it's PC or not. We should be able to have a conversation. I don't give a damn about PC. We got way too much to figure out. And what the hell has PC ever done for us anyway? My concern is not what's politically correct. My concern is that Black men actually learn how to articulate and advocate for themselves, most particularly for boys as well. To improve the quality of life means, for me, the starting point is that Black men actually invest in engaging their own issues without apology, without permission from anybody else. So when I'm listening to some of these male feminists attacking the manosphere, my question is, okay, well, if you're actually concerned about men, why is your only approach to attack men who are just starting to talk? And this is happening from the the root level. It's happening from the grassroots level. This is not happening in the academy. The academy is not the basis for this, like with other things, like intersectional feminism. This is actually starting from the ground up, where men, be they autodidacts, or anything else, are actually participating on their own terms. And I think that the possibilities for that are profound. So I participate in the conversation because I want to help in the ways that I think need to be seen fit. But I don't care about getting permission or approval from anybody else. I think we've spent too much time being concerned about that. So that said, I wanted to talk about gender ideology as the ninth component of this list. Right? Now, this list in and of itself, I argue, bolstered the efficacy and the breadth of what we might call the Black Gynocracy. I know some people have questioned that concept. It is what it is. At the end of the day, Black men are not in positions of authority in our community. We're not. And so when we talk about why we're not, a lot of us leave the conversation at whether or not we're acting like men, no, it's beyond that, because we're actually talking about policy. We're talking about policies that are tied to resources that people are competing over and have a profound effect on the quality of life for Black folk in particular. This doesn't go away if we just act more manly. That's not how this works. Policy plays a severe role in the shaping of the community. Hell, in this last 50, 60 years, marriage rates didn't go down because we just woke up one day and we're tired of being married. That's not what happened. The policies that came into play, most particularly the 8 that I listed, shaped Black reality, especially for Black boys and men, in ways that we're not allowed to talk about without being punished and really disciplined, right? For talking about in a way that's not consistent with how feminists want to shape the conversation. But men need to be able to talk about this in terms of how it impacted them rather than solely being concerned about how other people feel about what we have to say. So I talk about gender ideology. And I say that because having spent the last couple decades, oh shit, I'm going on 30 years in the academy at this point, as a student, grad student, and a faculty person, I've watched this take place where men's approaches or interest in gender ideology was shot down and dismissed, downplayed, unless they toed the line and followed feminist doctrine. It really makes no sense. There's only one acceptable gender ideology, most particularly in the Black Academy. That's Black feminism. Womanism isn't even considered acceptable, let alone anything else. This is one of the reasons I developed black masculinism, because there needs to be a space where Black men can actually have conversations about what works in their interests, what doesn't work, how things have affected them, how things didn't affect them, what things could have happened. There needs to be a space for that conversation, and it cannot happen within the confines of feminist discourse. The concepts alone don't allow for Black men to articulate themselves the way they need to, because they're deferring to women and girls. It is what it is. I'm not trying to attack women and girls. I'm not trying to dismiss their experiences, but I do know you cannot use a language that's not designed to suit your situation to understand your own situation. It doesn't work. Many have tried. And I remember sitting in those classes in undergrad and in grad school and listening to men be shamed and silenced even when they didn't say anything, simply because they were there. The whole conversations were around women and girls. And that's fine. But where can men have those conversations? Not very many places. And that's part of what I wanted to talk about today. You talk about gender ideology, especially as it's espoused and framed in the academy. There has been no formal space of significance where men have been able to do this and not be chastised and attacked and dismissed, and not have their gender ideologies framed as part of the discourse. Even within Africana studies or other fields where they want to have conversations about gender, the only acceptable, politically correct framework to have a discussion about gender is Black feminism. Anything produced in the interest of men and boys, most particularly heterosexual men and boys for that matter, is immediately shot down. Yeah. And that's a bit of a problem. And some of this is due to a number of different things. Let me see. I think this is going to be hard to see, but I'll try and pull it up on the screen best I can. Part of the reason that you have this overwhelming push for one gender ideology, one gender doctrine as it relates to Black folk in the academy is based on who's physically present. Now, these are the graduation rates from 1976 to 2019. I published this in a recent publication that I finished a while ago. Just got published a couple of days, well, maybe a couple of weeks ago. And it breaks down the actual rates of graduation. Some of my long-term supporters have seen this chart, although I updated this one for 2019. You know, so that said, if you can see in the middle column, sort of in the middle, I mean, the rest you can see for yourself. Those are the numbers, the raw numbers of certificates, associates, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and doctorates for white and Black men and women. You can see the numbers right there, the total numbers at the bottom. And then on the right, it breaks it down by race and gender. And at the end of the day, Black men have half the degrees of Black women and a fraction of the degrees of white males and white females. This is just the bottom line. So when you have a conversation about what gender discourse can look like, a lot of what happens is based on who's in the room. So in the academy, who's in the room is highly determined by who graduates, gets their degrees, and is able to be in the room, most particularly as a faculty person. And this isn't limited to just those degrees. We can also talk about this report here. Came out in April 2014. Employment status of instructional staff members in higher education. Right now, this is a little more than a decade old. So I'll leave it to you to ask the question: in what way have these numbers changed? But here is the breakdown of Black faculty in the academy, United States. So I highlighted the most relevant numbers: women at the top, men at the bottom. And at the end of the day, what you see is the total number of faculty is over 70,000 for women, Black women, right? Most particularly. I mean, this is Black, Hispanic, and white, so you can kind of see the breakdowns there. For Black men, 47,000. So this means that when you or someone else you know goes to school and they happen to deal with Black gender, they're less likely to deal with Black men. And that doesn't even account for ideology, right? Because as we can see, as in terms of what I'm talking about, we're also dealing with Black feminists, right? Who haven't crafted a discourse for Black men other than to defer to Black feminism. And part of the problem with this mean girl critique status they have, this high school level criticism style, this high school level debate style, is the glaring kryptonite is their inability to critique feminism or women. Incapable. Some of the biggest Black feminists, and I've been saying this for over a decade, some of the biggest Black male feminists I've run across will not utter a single critical word about feminism or women. Everything is taken wholesale. They are not allowed to question without being canceled, and they follow and toe the line to its full extent. Nothing of substance to be offered other than to repeat talking points that have been in circulation for years, right? So when you look at these numbers, they give you an indication of who's actually in the room, who's in a position to talk about and spread these ideas, and who isn't. And again, if all we've learned in terms of gender for the last few decades is that Black feminism is the only line to toe in terms of gender discourse, for many men, that's going to become their new Bible. That's going to become their new standard for what needs to be talked about and how. There's not going to be a crafting of anything new or anything particular to Black men, independent of other people's approval, because you've already been indoctrinated. And I say this as somebody who was. By the time I finished my doctorate, I considered myself a Black feminist. Until I actually started to see the impact of what I was teaching on young Black male students, most particularly freshmen and sophomores. The severe lack of empathy, the severe lack of representing their experiences in any way that was relevant to what they went through. None of it was there. I just gave them talking point after talking point, reading assignment after reading assignment that just kept drilling home that they were nothing but aspiring patriarchs that wanted to oppress and dominate. And I started to realize this is questionable because none of this presupposes their humanity. And when I actually started listening and letting those brothers speak, changed the entire dynamic and often shattered the presuppositions that people had about Black men and boys if you just gave them a chance to speak. But we can't do that. Instead, we have to label them as problems. And, patriarchs, misogynists, all those things have to come out even before Black men say a goddamn word, whether it's misogynistic or not. The accusation is still there based on who said it. And what ends up happening is a silencing that takes place. So by the time we get to the late 80s with Kimberly Crenshaw and the advent of intersectional feminism in its formal sense, right, there are other concepts that spoke to that in various ways by others. Bell Hooks dealt with some of it. Hell, even Robert Staples came up with concepts that showed you that this idea we call intersectionalism was around before Crenshaw herself. But when she develops it in a formal sense, one of the things she does is she suggests that Black males and Black females, Black men and women, experience oppression in a similar way, except that Black men are privileged because they have penises, because they're male. All of which flies in the face of some of Sedanius's work, where he actually proves empirically that Black men are actually hyper attacked because of their gender, not supported. They're not privileged because they're male. They're sought after to a greater degree because they're male. But there's no space in the discourse for that because it's considered inherently misogynistic, meaning that people won't even read the data behind the argument because it's counterintuitive to people's feelings. So the conversation ends there. And so when I talk about the impact of gender ideology and helping to craft and support a gynocratic framework, I'm talking about that because this idea of intersectional feminism is supported by the academy. It's financed by the academy. You're seeing feminists and feminist organizations like Kimberly Crenshaw's organization, for that matter, right? Financed philanthropically, state in terms of state resources, university resources, even federal resources, depending on the group in question. And we talk about this interesting relationship between ideology and hegemony. But strangely enough, we sidestep who's actually being financed to put forth these gender ideologies, none of which are crafted around Black male humanity, none of which acknowledges that Black men exist as human beings with their own experiences that are not necessarily the same as Black women and girls' experiences. They don't have to be antagonistic, but there is an antagonistic tone that comes about when you continuously sideline Black males, silence them, and then eliminate them from the academy, eliminate them from being able to participate in gathering resources that might work to their benefit, and most importantly, eliminate them from being able to craft ideas that suit other Black males, be they in the academy or not. That's not how you advance in the academy. You advance in the academy, if you're in this Black gender space, by breaking down and dismissing Black men. You don't get rich speaking well of Black men. You advance by tearing them down. And this is why I consider this Black gender discourse, most particularly since the 1980s, but we can go back to the 1970s as well. We can talk about the Combahee River Collective, their contributions as well. The advocating for women and girls is not my problem. The dismissal and dehumanization of Black men and boys is, and those two became synonymous in very particular types of Black feminism that have been popularly espoused and reinforced and financed by wealth. And so people take issue with the manosphere. And what is the manosphere exactly? You're talking about a collection of Black men on social media who built their own platforms from nothing. Every piece of equipment in this office that I wish I could show you, from computer monitors to the main computer itself, to the microphones, to the mixers, to the lights, every single thing in this office that I've used to broadcast my little tiny show with less than 30,000 subs was paid for by the brothers who watch my show, which is over 98, 99% Black male, or at least male. No, Black male, right? It's paid for everything here. There's no corporate financing. There's no university grants. None of this. This was all paid for by Black men who watch and support the show. That's grassroots. So if we're going to talk about hegemony, who's paying for this? Where are the resources coming from? Where these guys online are such a threat? Maybe they're a threat because the things they're talking about, it's time to be talked about by the people talking about them, not by others giving us permission on what to talk about. Maybe it's time for that. That's where we are at this moment, where somehow this ragtag group of men who are saying things that people don't like, and that's if people bother to pay attention. Just like I gave you in the example on Jared Ball's show, they didn't talk about what I said. They dismissed everything over a title of a video that they didn't even bother to watch. What good is that? You know, I'm past high school. This mean girl shit is stupid. Get to the arguments. How are what we're talking about, how is that improving the quality of life for Black men and boys? My argument is helping Black men and boys actually frame and articulate the things people don't want to hear most is an important stage in this process. I don't imagine it's going to stay this way. I hope that the manosphere and other spaces where Black men are talking, like Black male studies, will continue to evolve and develop. That's the point. I'm not advocating for something that's just happening today. I'm advocating for what it can be in 5 years. That's what I'm interested in. And don't get it twisted. Every movement starts out problematically, or at least in conflict. Black feminism was no less misandrous as the manosphere is being accused of being misogynist. And they still are. They still are talking about these women on Twitter who are calling Black men bullet bags. You want to look at how many of them actually have degrees or took courses in Black gender studies, Black women's studies, Black feminism? The main ones who identify as black feminists or articulate themselves with the rhetoric of black feminists generally have a college degree. They've taken gender courses at universities. Majority of the manosphere haven't. These are brothers who are talking from their lived experiences and trying to build a sense of how to approach the world differently on those terms. But many of these women are coming out of university classes with a sincere hatred. Look, I served as an assistant dean at the Claremont colleges. I watched women come in and within the first 2 weeks of being students at a university develop a severe hatred for black males that they had never espoused before. And early in the first third of their semester, they were attacking black men who were just there having their first semester, didn't have any experiences, weren't oppressing anybody. They were new. They were first years. They were coming in wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, open, trying to develop friendships, relationships. I've watched them be attacked, yelled at, publicly embarrassed, using these concepts that came out of these gender studies courses and directed at them like Uzis. I've seen it happen for decades. This shit ain't new. The hatred toward black men has actually been cultivated in classrooms with required reading. And I'm telling you it's required because I had to read the shit. I had to read the Combahee River Collective. I had to read Bell Hooks. I had to read Patricia Hill. I had to read all of that in order for me to get my degree. What Kevin Samuels video did you have to watch to get yours? People are pissed off about a dude on YouTube for 2 years. I've been reading misandric feminists for decades. Hell, I remember going to see Color Purple before I knew what it was. My family assigned me to read that goddamn novel, and I read it several times. And I couldn't describe the feeling I had because I was too young to explain it, and I didn't have the verbiage. I didn't have the vocabulary. But the dehumanization of black men with these rare categories, this Mr. figure who's a wealthy farm owner right after slavery. Are you fucking serious? That's about as obscure as what we saw in Harriet with the black male slave catcher who's sleeping with white prostitutes and bragging about it in front of white men. They would have lynched his ass. But somehow those kind of characters became not only synonymous with black men, but the face of it. My grandmother-in-law went to her grave hating Danny Glover simply because he played the role. And for her, he was emblematic of black men. So when I talk about gender ideology, yes, there's a component of it that comes out of the university classroom, but then there's also the other part of it, mostly popularized by Oprah. She opened up the spigot and she took this obscure group of feminists in the academy and she made it mainstream. And we've been watching films, movies, and plays, reading books of it ever since. And it produced others, like male feminists, or at least those who espouse that, like Tyler Perry. It reproduced the same hatred and disdain for black men while ignoring black men's experiences. When black men's rates of abuse are the same as black women's, nobody thinks about that because we've only heard the rhetoric about women's victimization. If you read the Man Not, there are years where black men's abuse rates were higher than black women's. Nobody knows it. Nobody talks about it because we can't conceptualize black men as being anything other than villains, sexists, patriarchs, so on and so forth. So I applaud black men who are stepping away from the judgment, the shaming, the maligning of their character, and actually trying to have conversations that are at least an attempt at some kind of pure sense of their own experiences, regardless of what others think about it, as a basis for starting a conversation with other black men, because that's the other component of it. I learned that to do this work in many respects, I had to actually talk to black men, and other people who are in here are not my priority. If you're not black and male, you're welcome here. But the people I'm talking to and about are black males. That's the starting point. Those are the people I'm talking to most. If you want to participate in that conversation, and you can do so with some degree of, honor, purity, some truth in terms of why you're here, you can engage. If the only reason you're here is to cause, havoc and chaos, you can get the fuck out of here. You got plenty of other spaces that already reinforce that. You don't need to be here for that. I'm talking to black men. Because when you look at this list of policies that I put up, None of this shit is accidental. None of it. These are the policies that shaped Black male life, that impacted everything from what opportunities you had and didn't have to what kind of family structure you grew up in, what role you could play in it, what role you could expect to play in it. All of this was already impacted by policy. And that's the point I want to talk about. I'm not really as much on dealing with dating issues. There are other people to do that. They're better trained for it. Great. I've had those issues. I can understand what's being said about it, but my concern is how have we shaped human behavior in the Black community using policy over the decades? And what does it shape us into? I argue the hatred of Black men, the misandry, is rooted in a response to these policies here. But I'm adding to this list number 9, gender ideology. Espoused in universities, popularized in mainstream culture. It produced and reproduces a hatred toward Black males to a degree I've never seen in my life. Some of the things I'm hearing and seeing now. And when you get down to it, you got male feminists that have no problem attacking other Black men over the slightest indiscretion they consider an issue, but will stand next to noted misandrists and ignore the shit. I watched FD Signifier and Jared Ball have a conversation about me. They had more to say about me based on a title of a video, and they skipped over the therapist, the Black therapist that's been in the news this last few weeks. FD actually brought her up. All he had to say was, well, there's a distance between feminism and Black men, and then went in on me. I've never talked to the dude. I don't know the dude. He clearly didn't watch anything. I'm not saying he would agree if he did, but at least if you're going to argue with somebody, have the wherewithal to at least listen to what they had to say to decide what you agree with and what you don't. But the fact that you couldn't critique Black women, that's the fundamental issue, because when I was a Black feminist, I couldn't do it either. And part of the other issue to that too is how we are introduced to Black feminism. Many of us come into these universities, and as I showed earlier with the data, when we look at the present, look at the numbers of who's there, they're overwhelmingly, in Black spaces, women. Usually when I have a conversation with a Black feminist, we get down to a male Black feminist, we get to the core of it. There's a mother figure or grandmother figure that they ran into at these universities. And they were introduced to Black feminism through those relationships. So in other words, you go from, birth to high school in a female-centered dynamic, the family setting, overwhelmingly female-led. You go into your K through 12 classes, again, overwhelmingly female-led. Many of those spaces, 90% of the teachers are female. Then you go to college. For the percentage of those that do, again, predominantly female space. And if you're if you're Black in the academy and you're participating in Black spaces like Africana Studies or anything of that nature, again, overwhelmingly female-led. And you end up with a mother figure or a grandmother figure that brings you into gender studies using this ideology, and how you don't imagine that this could be something that's problematic for men, because you're used to taking nothing but direction from women and girls, most particularly women, but it is what it is. It just smoothly kind of goes along, and you ignore the impact that it actually has. And so when you do start to question, you actually feel wrong for doing it, because you've not been taught how to question in any other way. What you've been taught is to agree and defer to women because you're supposed to. And if you question it, you can be silenced, you can be canceled, you can be dismissed. And usually this dismissal comes with terms like misogynist and so on and so forth. I argue that this is a type of brainwashing. And that sounds like hyperbole, but it really isn't. When you look at who's in the classroom, when you look at which ideologies are acceptable and which ones aren't even allowed to be developed or talked about, why do you think I'm here? I can't talk about these ideas in the academy. Nobody's willing to do it in public unless it defers to a Black feminist, framework. Then it's acceptable. But men actually talking about gender in terms of Black men's experience, particularly heterosexual Black men's experiences, no, that can't happen. Not without getting your hand slapped or canceled. So I actually go where the brothers are and have the conversation. And it's a process. So anyway, trying to do this because they just delivered a package I got to grab. And I'm supposed to attend another meeting that's already started. But I had to say a few words about this because when I really thought about it, there are at least 9 practices and policy-based behavior that shapes in many ways this experience we have and bolsters the gynocracy that people don't want to argue exists. You dismiss the concept without even entertaining it simply because it's not acceptable to Black feminists. But again, look at who's getting the degrees. Look at who's in a position of authority, especially when you talk about representational politics, representative politics. When you look at these kinds of frameworks, who's in control of the family, who's the decision making, who gets custody of the kids, right? BGS talks about this as a classic example of whether or not you're dealing with a patriarchal society, who gets custody of the kids. In each of these dynamics, you're not talking about Black men. The only way we're in a position of authority is in the realm of stereotype. And that authority is rooted in these assumptions and declarations of Black men being abusers. When you actually start looking at the rates of abuse in depth, it's only acceptable to talk about abuse as long as you toe the company line. And that's a problem people have with it. Let me say. I think there was something I wanted to show, but I don't think I'm going to have time. Anyway, there's more to talk about. I just wanted to get that off my chest today. I think when we start to talk about policy, I think that needs to be far more of how we start these conversations amongst ourselves and look at the impact of the environment on our behavior and how that can be shifted. Again, those of you who follow the Onyx Report know I am an advocate of the Black male political agenda. This is something that we've been pushing over here for a while, trying to make sure that people participate in. This is a living document, as it were. Ideas can continue to be added to it for policies that can be useful to Black men. And here's the thing, this agenda in and of itself is not, it's not designed for it to work for everybody. The question I raise with doing this is, can we have a space that is static in the sense that you can reference it easily, that outlines in bullet form what the key political ideas are that Black men themselves, based on their own experiences, identify as useful, rather than having other people tell us what will be useful to us? Can we actually have a conversation amongst ourselves and lay out in bullet format the policy ideas that we think will benefit us? Because here's the thing, I'm not talking about this as a Democrat or a Republican. I'm talking about this in much the way Ice Cube talked about, which I've been hearing from people like Farrakhan since the 1980s. You need to put yourself in an independent position and negotiate with whomever you need to push for policies that are in your interest. But part of the problem we have is we don't even know what's in our interest. We haven't had that conversation. Y'all tell me, when's the last time you saw a Black male political agenda? Don't worry, I'll wait. I never saw one. So before people come at me talking about this is conservative or this is whatever, I'm like, look, this is what brothers came together and put down in writing based on their own experiences. Why that hasn't happened in any significant manner prior to now, I don't know. And if there's an older list that you can find, please furnish it, because I do not want to be right about this. But I've never seen one. When I've consulted with academic colleagues and asked about it, they've not seen one. Not to say that we're all right. Again, if you got evidence to the contrary, please provide it. I would love to be able to look at it and see if there's anything we can use. But I'll tell you this, even if there is a Black male political agenda that's 30, 40, 50 years old, the fact that it isn't in circulation, it isn't in a part of the discourse, tells us something about Black men. We didn't conceptualize ourselves as a distinct gender. We thought of ourselves in many ways as part of the community. It was a communal focus. But now we're being forced to think of ourselves as a distinct demographic. in ways we never have before. And it's time. Because when you look at many of the data sets that tell us where Black men are and Black boys and the quality of life we live, from employment to homelessness, I mean, you name it, to cancer rates, HIV rates, Black men are at the bottom or the top in terms of the worst situations, depending on the chart. It's time we actually have a conversation about how to change that. So anyway, appreciate the support. It needs to happen. What's up, Spain Man? Spain Man, hit me on Facebook. I got a couple of slots open for a friend, for another Facebook friend, and I couldn't remember your real name. So hit me on Facebook Messenger again so I can add you. But I appreciate the support. Shout out to Passport OG for the sticker. Shout out to Great I9. Says paid for by us. Right? Appreciate that support. Shout out to Malk Smith. Says, I appreciate the work, your work, good doctor. Much appreciation to you. Appreciate that generous donation. Shout out to what he had, a soul. I know I mispronounced that. Shout out to MLR for the Cash App. But appreciate that support. He says, on birthrights, women should have wore a condom. Also, women condoms can break. We need other control. Hey, we've heard it. Right. So anyway, just wanted to get that out. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts. Please go ahead and drop it in the comment section and give me your thoughts. If you have something to add, I look forward to reading it. So then, y'all have a good night. Peace.